Hello there, and thanks for joining us on this week's episode of the program Around Africa. I'm your host, BROWNSON, and joining me on the program today is Victor Ahai, an African Affairs Analyst. Victor, good to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Africa, a very unique continent, and of course, full of different challenges. And we've been touring around Africa, we've been seeing different issues, but today we'll be taking our viewers to Somalia, where a lot of things have been happening, especially they've been suffering from famine, food crisis, and a lot of things. But quickly, Somalia has been described as a country without a government due to some reasons. But let's quickly start from how did Somalia get to this point?
Well, the origin of Somalia's present-day crisis can be traced back to the regime of Said Barre, Mohammed Said Barre. This was a man who, you know, like most African leaders, you know, usually after a while, you get in there, become popular, and then suddenly it gets into your head, and then you become almost like a maximum dictator, you know, clamping down on every form of opposition and all that. And when you do that, and when you run people aground, obviously what you're going to do is begin to build pockets of resistance, which will evolve into rebellion and rebel groups and all that. That's what, you know, that's where it all started from. And this resulted into pockets of groups who now, you know, decided to come and, you know, start fighting against him. And chief among them was, I think, the United Somali Congress. And so a lot of them came in at the time and, you know, eventually overthrew the regime. And when that happened, because there were pockets of, you know, different resistance groups, there was no one particular, you know, group that would particularly like take over. And so what you find was a situation where, like the case in Libya, where you had territorial warlords. You know, this continued for a while until, you know, the UN decided to say, okay, let them try and get an interim government, bring all warring sides together. But by which time, I mean, you know, so much had happened. You know, Al-Shabaab, for instance, had evolved from another, you know, group, but had become very, very strong and, you know, started inflicting a lot of damage, you know, on the psyche and on the people of Somalia and surrounding environments. I mean, they've had help, for instance, from the African Union. They've had help from Ethiopia, but it has not been enough. You know, it was in the midst of all this that even Somaliland broke away and became a country of its own, even although it doesn't have full recognition yet. But the fall started all the way back from Said Barre's time.
All right, of course, looking at Somali, one of the histories about Somali is the fact that it was a country that was rich in commerce and, of course, at a point had a very good, stable economy. But now the big question is, why is the famine only existing in that part, in that part of the continent?
Well, interestingly, it's peculiar to that side. I think it has to do with the ecological makeup of the area, because remember, it's not just Somali. Countries like Ethiopia, when you talk about severe famine, you know, on the continent, it's usually in the Horn of Africa. Somalia, Ethiopia particularly have been worse hit. So although they are a country that borders, you know, the coast, you know, the waters, but something about it, I don't claim to be an ecological expert, you know, or a climate expert, but that particular area does seem to be prone to issues of famine, but also conflict sometimes creates it, because when you have an environment where ordinarily people would normally farm, where I begin to experience it in Nigeria, for instance, because with what has been happening with Boko Haram up north, you will suddenly discover that things like tomatoes and the rest of them, foodstuff, things are, you know, becoming increasingly higher than ordinarily they would have been because of the crisis there. In any region where there's crisis, you cannot farm, you know, you cannot grow, people cannot you cannot settle down to grow crops, and you are bound to have problems like that.
All right, of course. Yeah, can we say the famine led to the revolution or the evolution of Al-Shabaab?
Not particularly. Al-Shabaab is not the famine. Although in a sense you can say that Al-Shabaab, no, it didn't. I mean, Al-Shabaab was a completely different thing altogether. Al-Shabaab is a rebel group, okay? And this group came out, they are an Islamic, Al-Shabaab is, the meaning of Al-Shabaab is youth, you know, in Arabic. You know, it's like a youth militant group. And this is a group that believes in the Wahhabi sect, the predominantly Wahhabi sect from Saudi Arabia. Somalians are predominantly Sufi, okay? And the Wahhabis are, I mean, that's a completely different, they implement stricter Sharia that involves stoning women who commit adultery, cutting hands of people who steal, and things like that. The Sufi Islam is a bit more liberal. It's a bit more accommodating. It's not as strict as the Wahhabi. Now, Al-Shabaab are proponents or advocates of this strict Sharia and Islamic way of life. And they came to implement it. And at the time they came, you know, because of the general insecurity, they gained acceptance because they promised security. And so many of the tribes and clans accepted them until when, you know, the issue of which comes to what we were talking about, when famine, you know, there was famine situation and all that. And then the US and the UN were offering food aid, and this was turned down by Al-Shabaab. And that's when the people then took a second look and wondered and said, I mean, if you claim to be protecting us, you want to give us security, why would you stop food aid from coming to us? You know, in a sense, I would say that's where Al-Shabaab's own problem started, you know, because then the people began to resist. Were they coming in as a form of government, you know, to provide like an alternative to the government they didn't have? Well, there was no government, so if they were coming to provide security, it was, in a sense, you know, they were propagating their way of life, their religion, or their type of Islam. And of course, if you are providing security in a place, you are the government of the place. So that, to a very large extent, was what they were doing. You know, whatever territories any group occupied, it was the government, you know, of the particular territory. And that was what you found, you know, at the time in the place.
All right, of course. One of the things that we have to look at is the fact that UN accused Al-Shabaab of imposing a ban on foreign aid and its territory. Just like you explained, that was one of the reasons why the citizens had to revolt, that if they're really fighting for their interests, you know, they shouldn't resist aid, because at the point, a lot of people have donated money, and it seems like it's not enough. And also, one of the questions that has really not been answered is, who is behind the lawlessness in that part of the country?
Where there is no government, obviously, you can't really talk about law, because there's a breakdown of the system. That is what has happened. The UN has tried to put together an interim government, and the African Union is also supporting it. And they have, to a very large extent, tried to dislodge Al-Shabaab from Mogadishu. The biggest blow came when they were dislodged from Kismayo. Kismayo is a coastal town, and you know, they make their money from what you call it now, from ivory trade. You know, where they kill a lot of elephants, and a lot of the rangers that look after this, that protect this wildlife as well. So they kill them. They sell this ivory to raise money, and what happens is that their biggest source of revenue is from Kismayo, because they have coal in that place there. So they're able to plunder it and sell it. And the coast there is an easy, if you like, outlet for them to be able to, you know, sell these things. And so to a very large extent, they have been dislodged. They're no longer as strong as they used to be, but they're still as lethal as they have always been. Because you see, they're a guerrilla group. They're not a group that you can say, okay, you can grab, you can attack them. There's no front line where anybody can say they want you to attack them. They are like the Boko Haram of Nigeria, you know, where they move in pockets and, you know, just attack, retreat, attack, retreat, and plunder, and so they are really like a guerrilla group right now, but they're still very, very effective.
All right, of course, at this point, go for a very quick break. Somali coastline has been declared the deadliest coastline in the world. That'll be after the break. Stay with us.
Core TV News presents a platform with presence in over 30 states of the Federation. Be sure to be had. For live coverage of events, we have the capacity to deliver from anywhere in Nigeria and beyond. Contact us now on 0803 471 8550 or 0803-724-9733, 014-533-407.
Our 24-hour news station.
You're welcome back from that break. And of course, moving on the program, Somalia territory, water coast, is the deadliest coast in the world right now. And I think the militants, they've taken advantage of it. Now it has gone beyond just fighting for the peace or for whatever it has to do with the country. Now, I think they now have pirates. And it's now the deadliest, has been declared the deadliest coast in the world.
I want to correct an impression. The militants are completely different from the pirates. If anything, the pirates are more humanitarian. The pirates are criminal gentlemen. I understood how the Somali piracy started in the first place. When there was a breakdown of law of government in Somalia, then people from other countries started taking advantage of the coastal area. And the first set of so-called pirates were really angry fishermen who were defending their territory, against people who were coming to, if you like, steal fishes from their coastal area. Dangerous only to the extent that, yes, the ships and all that, but it is on record that they don't kill. Instead, they take hostage. They make it that way because you pay. You understand? So, for good, but for human lives, not necessarily. Shipping companies are forced to pay. And it's a very lucrative business for them. The government in Somalia, it remains it's the biggest business in Somalia.
All right, of course, report says that African Development Bank approved an emergency assistance fund for Somali, Kenya, and Ethiopia. And of course, the big question is, why is it taking time for the fund to reflect in the life of these countries?
Well, first, you need a bit of stability. And this is where, again, you might say the pirates are a bit dangerous. When aids are coming, for instance, let's say food aids, the pirates get onto them first. And sometimes their argument is that if they don't get these aids, the warlords will take them over, which sounds like a plausible argument. They are more humane in what they do with what they take. And so in terms of aids and in terms of humanitarian assistance that comes in through the sea, these are the mercy of the pirates, But for the ADB, of course, it's one thing to send money down. It's another thing for the money to trickle down to where it's supposed to get to. Because there are many areas, don't forget, many areas are still...
Who manages the funds?
Well, the interim government is in charge. They have the backing of the African Union and the UN, of course. So technically they are in charge. But on the ground, how much in charge are they? How much in charge of Somalia are they? That is the question. There's a limit to how far they can go because of the limit of their influence, because of Al-Shabaab and other insurgents and other militants, that are in charge of certain parts of Somalia.
I was still looking at the pirates and, of course, some of the things and in between. Now, you made mention of the involvement of Al-Shabaab. How can they be caught? Because I think it's a very important factor if there have to be peace in that part of the country.
Are you talking pirates now or are you talking Al-Shabaab?
Pirates, Al-Shabaab, all encompassed.
Piracy, once a proper government is in place, piracy will come down, for sure. Because there will be a proper navy to police the waters. Okay? But Al-Shabaab is where the problem is. Now, this is a militant group with guerrilla style and tactics. And, you know, the way they attack is such that, like I said, they don't have a front line. So it's a bit difficult to say, okay, this is where Al-Shabaab is. Once you move into that territory, you can mow them down. It's not as easy as that. You know, it has to be a concerted effort, or, you know, by all the, you know, all the surrounding countries, Ethiopia, Kenya, and the other countries surrounding, you know, Somalia. They have to come together. Indeed, they're trying, you know, along with is it AFRISOM now, the African Regional Force that is fighting. They all have to come together.
But then let's look at the involvement of the international community.
Yeah.
Now, would you say they've really done well, you know, in helping the situation?
They have tried. They're actually showing concern because, you know, indeed there's great prospects in Somalia. There's oil there, and the Americans, for instance, would take an interest, would be interested in the oil from there, you know, and other countries have an interest also in that region. It's a region that is potentially lucrative. And so it is in the interest, I mean, if there's no peace in Somalia, like the situation is now, even business in Kenya may be a bit shaky. Kenya has the most stable democracy, you might say, in East Africa at the moment. But even they are being threatened. And so that's why it's not only in their own interest and the interest of the East African countries, but whoever is doing business in that region, or whoever has economic interest in that region, to make sure that peace is restored to the region.
All right, analysts have said the long-term solutions to the problem of this has to focus on the stability of the economy. How possible is this, considering the situation?
Well, of course, yes. If the economy is not stable, what can you do? But first, there must be security. After security, then you can talk about economic stability. In that order, and not before. You cannot have economic stability without security. So the first thing to be tackled is security. After you've tackled security, then you make sure that the government in place has, you know, I mean, can, you know, you restore law and order. Apart from the security, you restore proper law and order so that if you need to put punitive measures in place to correct people, you can do that. Only then, because you can't even talk about economic stability where there's corruption, where there's piracy, for instance, and general insecurity. So once you have all of this in place, then you have economic stability. And once you have economic stability, it's a potentially, how do I put it now, viable region. You saw what happened in Rwanda. You know, as soon as peace was restored to Rwanda, as soon as security was restored to Rwanda, as soon as a proper government was in place in Rwanda, Rwanda, you know, was automatically on the way up. And Rwanda today is one of the thriving economies on the continent. You know, so it is important that some of these conditions are in place for economic stability to take place.
Now, sometimes it's very easy for people to look at international community, United Nations, the US, and of course some of the big country. But let's bring it back to Africa. What's the role of the African Union in some of these crises on the continent?
Well, first, I think to succeed, even before the African Union, the sub-regional groups have a very important role to play. The neighbors of these countries. I'll give you a small example. Just yesterday or 2 days ago, it was reported that Cameroon had captured about, how many, almost 40 or so, Boko Haram militants or insurgents within Cameroonian territory. If the Nigerian army, for instance, I'm just using it as an example, I'll now take it down to Somalia. If the Nigerian army were to chase Boko Haram, for instance, to the borders, without the cooperation of Cameroon, Chad, Niger, you know, and the neighbors, there's nothing you can do. They will go in there and they will strike back at you from that place, and when you are coming, they will escape into those areas. But if you make it difficult for them over there, and it becomes difficult here, then they are sandwiched. What that says is there must be regional cooperation to fight terrorism. There must be, where there are no treaties or cooperation agreements, these have got to be put in place to ensure that these militants and rebel groups, and even the issue of proliferation of small arms across territories, that they are checked. Because a threat to one is a threat to all. Okay? If militants are pushed from one country and they enter another, they are as dangerous in the new country, maybe even more so than where they're coming from. Okay? So, in this particular situation, before the African Union, first the neighbors have to cooperate and agree that there's a need for them to help Somalia in this battle, and that Somalia's peace is their peace. Somalia's stability is their stability. If they do this, and they've been doing it, Ethiopia has demonstrated that in the past. Kenya is doing that as well, but maybe much more so. And then the African Union, can then come in. Whatever they do will then be effective. The African Union can supply forces on the ground as well as they have done, with the UN to police more effectively, because it won't be effective if you don't have the cooperation of, the regional partners, and neighbors of Somalia, for instance.
All right, finally, before I let you go, do you think pumping in more money is going to help solve the situation of the famine going on in that country?
Well, money is always helpful and useful.
What do you think should come first? Should it be security, or
well, you need
should
money
it be
for
more
security?
money?
No, you need money for security as well. Because I tell you what, an absence of money is an absence of security. If you starve people in your area right now and they become hungry, if you're the richest man in that area and everybody else around you is hungry, you are not safe. You know what I mean? So money is very helpful. It will help security, because when you provide food and you meet people's basic needs, then you can begin to talk security. Because when people are satisfied, then they want to protect what they have. So more money is needed, but that money has to be channeled properly for it to be effective.
So what would be a recommended solution?
Well, Somalia has suffered for too long, if I may use that language. And I think it is a shame to the rest of Africa that that country's problem has gone on for this long. There's a need to not only pay lip service to restoring peace to Somalia, but to actually be seen to be doing something as a continent. We don't even need to wait for help from outside the continent to ensure that peace, stability, and security and a good government is restored to that country.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Around Africa, we'll be back again next week. We'll be looking at some other issues that concerns the continent. My name is BROWNSON, UNWANA, on behalf of my production crew. Thanks for watching.